You are a classic English liberal
Yes.
for a black and slow person like me. What does that mean?
Honestly, I'm basically a Republican in America. Your republic is the great English experiment in republicanism. You're doubtless aware that Thomas Jefferson was heavily influenced by John Locke, who is the one of England's leading classical liberal intellectuals. And I think that if you're going to structure a world in such a way, if you're going to make a rational decision, how should the world be ordered? Then I think you could do a lot worse than the American Republic. You know, this is and there are actually some really important and very fine distinctions that can be made here between your republic and, say, the French Republic and various other republics around the world. And I think this distinction is why the American Republic works and why the French model doesn't work. And it begins and ends, in my opinion, in the conception of where do our rights come from? Now, like I said, I'm an atheist, but I do believe my rights are innate. They're inalienable.
Yeah.
They're part of me.
Yeah.
The number of rights in the world are equal to the number of people. You know, you can't expand or contract rights. It's just equal to the number of people. And that's the model upon which the American Republic is founded. Rights are inherent. The government's job is to protect those rights. There are constitutional limits on the power of government. And therefore, this is how we remain free. And it works. It's definitely worked. We can see this worked. Whereas the French model is rights are constructed by the state. And this, of course, as many American conservatives will say is, well, aren't you making the state God?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You are giving the state the authority of God. And from this, you can see how socialism and fascism develop. Whereas in the English model, you'll notice that socialism and fascism don't come from the English-speaking world. We haven't had any tyrants. I mean, the last tyrant in England was in the 17th century. This is before the American Republic was even created. You know, the American Republic has not had a tyrant. The Canadians have not had a tyrant. The Australians, New Zealanders, nowhere in the English-speaking world have we had tyrants since the modern era. You know, whereas the continent in Europe has been awash with tyrants for hundreds of years who have claimed absolute dominion and authority over their state. And I think this really is the prime difference and why the American Republic works, why the rest of the English-speaking world as constitutional monarchies work, and why the continent's experiments in republicanism and any other kind of government they do, frankly, constantly fails.
Yeah.
Constantly fails.
Amazing, man. Were you raised with the same political views that you have now?
You know, my parents weren't overly political in the home, which I appreciate now I think back on it. But my father was definitely a conservative because in the 1970s we had a left-wing government and they ruined this country, as you can imagine, and as the Democrats are in fact doing in your country right now. It's actually very similar.
Yes.
They had, you know, rolling blackouts, rubbish not collected in the streets, 3-day work weeks, things like this. You know, it's exactly the same playbook, and it always is with the left. It's exactly the same playbook, and this was upended with Reagan and Thatcher. My dad, growing up as a young man under Thatcher's tenure, he found he was, well, I mean, my dad was a hardworking man, so he came from a very poor background. So it was always beaten in the English working class. It's beaten into you. You work hard or you get nothing.
Yeah.
So my father, you know, joined the Royal Air Force at like 16 to escape poverty. Worked his way up, became a sergeant, left the Air Force, got a pension, and so I got a nice sort of lower middle class upbringing in a safe and secure environment. And so it's not actually that I was raised conservative consciously. It's just that this kind of cultural attitude is, I guess, what we call a naturally conservative one. And of course, in my 20s, I decided, I'm going to read theory. And so I read like about half of Capital by Marx. I read, you know, just around the subject. Didn't really get into it too much in my 20s because I just wasn't that interested in it. But, you know, I was smart enough to understand it, so I gave it a go. And I guess I came out fairly left-leaning. And so it's only in my 30s and now that I've just looked at it and gone, right, okay, what do I agree with on the left wing? What premises do they have that I agree with? And fundamentally, I think it all boils down, and I hate to keep laboring this distinction, but I think this is true. I think it boils down to the view of the world that came out of the Enlightenment from the English and the French philosophers. So you have a French philosopher called Rousseau who thinks who thought, I mean, and he says this in his social contract, that the person who first mapped out some private property should have had the stakes pulled up, and this should have been abolished because civilization is what corrupts us. Whereas in the English view, you've got the sort of Hobbesian view that, look, before civilization, life was nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah.
And that seems to have been true. And it is, in fact, civilization that civilizes us into being good people. We habituate ourselves into goodness. And without this kind of habituation, without our ability to be able to educate ourselves, have law and order and property and all these things, then we'd be savages living in the jungles, and it'd be terrible for us. Yeah. And I agree with that. I disagree with the French view that kind of fetishizes the noble savage, and weren't they perfect then? Well, not really. Things were really bad, actually, and they actually suffered a lot. And there's a reason we worked so hard on civilization, building up everything we have around it. This was a lot of work. Yeah. It took a long time, and it was really worthwhile. And so to pretend that is the reason that we're bad is not true. We're without good moral guidance from a young age, we turn out to be bad people. So it kind of implies that naturally we don't have an innate set of morals, and we have to be taught morals. Even though naturally we might have a need for morals, of course, as social creatures, it seems that otherwise we default into sort of just power struggles. And I think that law and order is a way we can avoid that.
So are white people innately smarter than people of color?
No.
Why is it? It seemed to be, unless I'm missing it. And I'm black and slow, and I could be missing it. Why is it that?
I don't think you're slow at all, actually. I've watched more than enough of your interviews to watch you completely wrong foot leftists with questions they don't expect. You're not slow at all. This is a very clever ruse that you play, I think. But
so no, why is it that white? Thank you. But why is it that white people seem to be the only race of people that have gone throughout the earth and built amazing countries based on God and individuality and Constitution and all those good things, when everybody else seems to want to come and destroy it? Why is it that only white, that I'm aware of, maybe there are others I don't know about it, but why is it that only white people have been able to do that?
Well, so I think that this is where the use of the term white isn't terribly effective, because as I was pointing out, there's a gulf of difference between English and continental European thought. And continental European thought, in my opinion, is much more reminiscent of thought around the world. And I think it comes from a particular kind of geographic privilege that specifically the English enjoyed. So in the British Isles, England is by far the largest nation and by far the most powerful. And so it was destined on that basis to be the dominant force of the British Isles. And so, by the middle of the Middle Ages, England had subdued Scotland and Wales and Ireland, right? So there was no threat that was, coming from its own local area. Yeah. And so the interesting thing about England is it's always been quite a small parochial place, right? It's always been quite inward looking and concerned with itself and how the world should be organized. The key aspect of English culture, which thankfully got exported to our colonies, is accountability. How can we hold the people above us accountable? Yeah. Now that's quite unique. To have that as a primary value is quite unique. Obviously, accountability is nice everywhere, but in Russia they don't expect accountability. Right. Obviously, in Eastern Europe they don't expect accountability. Corruption is the name of the game. They expect it there, and I think it's something to do with geography, because when you're connected to Asia, that means you are basically vulnerable to massive invasions of terrifying people. Right. So all throughout history, for the past 2,000 years, every couple of hundred years, a people would arrive off of the Eurasian steppe, and they would be scary as all hell. They are, these are people who don't consider your life to have any value, and they just want to kill you, enslave you, and take what you have. And England, being an island, was actually spared from a lot of that. It meant that it had a kind of wonderful natural moat. And so it had the freedom to be able to develop a very closely connected a culture of trust and accountability. And I don't think that really would have been possible considering the chaos that was going on the continent and elsewhere in the world. And so I actually put it down to the geographical uniqueness of where the English were compared to the rest of the world. It's not about like being smarter or superior or anything like that. It's actually, frankly, a bit of luck that we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And you know that but I don't want to take away the constitutional innovations. You know, these are part of the moral excellence of the English speaking people. These are genuinely something we can be proud of, because this is what led to the ending of slavery. This is what led to the formation of our human rights, you know, as we worldwide understand human rights now. These things used to be called the rights of Englishmen. And it was very interesting that the American colonists, they didn't think that this ended at the borders of England. They brought these rights with them, and part of one of the reasons they were arguing against the King of England was that he was denying them their rights as Englishmen to representation in the Parliament. You know, how dare you? We're Englishmen. Of course we are. And listen, name the founding fathers: Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. You couldn't get more English names if you tried. You know, these weren't Frenchmen saying these are French rights. These were English rights. And you know, through the Enlightenment, we decided, well, actually, these are actually human rights. You know, all humans have the same abilities that we have. And so we've expanded that. And I think it's at that point that we kind of assumed that everyone else just agreed with us. Whereas, in fact, a lot of people don't agree with us. We should be more aggressive by saying, no, look, this is the English way, and we are going to do it this way because this works. You know, we don't have tyrants. You do. You learn how we work, and that's better for everyone.
Amazing.